Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, a fiendishly fun chat with Connecticut's own Lorien Lawrence. Lorien is the author of the popular middle grade series Fright Watch, which has drawn comparisons to Goosebumps and Stranger Things. Even Stephen King promised the chills come guaranteed. The third entry, Unmasked, introduces a new heroine, Marion Jones. Having suffered from anxiety attacks since the age of 8, she has found comfort and control in making monster masks. But when one of her creations comes to life on a super blue blood moon Halloween, she must confront her fears and her crush to vanquish the monster and save the day. Fans of the series will be happy to know that best friends Quinn and Mike, who headlined the Stitchers and the Collectors, are among the cast of fresh and familiar faces. Lorien has creative writing degrees from Wheaton College and the UK's Bath Spa University. In addition to being a writer and fan of all things spooky, she is a middle school English teacher, wife, and mom to 2 young children. Yes, she does it all. Beyond the Fright Watch series, she just signed a deal for The Many Hauntings of the Manning Family, a dual point of view middle grade novel slated for publication in the fall of 2024. In the meantime, Fright Watch Unmasked is guaranteed to captivate readers of all ages and leave them shrieking for more. New York Times bestselling author Jacqueline West enthused, creepy, clever, and so much fun. Lorien Lawrence creates complex characters you can't help but love, and lurking monsters who will stop your heart. Hail the teen scream queen. Now, turn up the lights, tune out all things that go bump in the night, and join me for a creeptastic conversation with Lorien Lawrence. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. I am excited today to be in the virtual company of Lorien Lawrence, who is the author of the Stephen King-approved Fright Watch series, the third of which, Unmasked, there it is, very eerie, will be out on August 30th. Welcome back to the show, Lorien.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat about spooky things with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you back. I should tell people, if you missed it last year, Lorien was on with Goldie Moldavsky and Emily Arsenault for a Halloween show all about, spooky middle grade and YA reads. So if you missed that, I will drop the link in the video description. But here you are, solo, very brave, coming back alone. But so like I said, you have a third book in the Fright Watch series that's coming out very, very soon. It's called Unmasked, and it seems sort of the ideal entry point for people who might be new to the series, as well as loyalists who are coming back for a third round, because you actually sort of expand the creative canvas that you established in the first 2 books. So we'll break it down in a minute, but just in a very general sense, can you tell us, how you're taking some liberties with this book that makes it different from the first 2?
I have a different main character. So the first 2 books are through Quinn Parker's point of view, and it focuses on her and her friend Mike as they investigate. Sorry, friends, you're going to hear my dog in the background. That's Harvey. He says hi. And so the first 2 books focus on Quinn and Mike, and it's through Quinn's point of view as they, investigate their creepy neighborhood and all the people around them. And Unmasked, I wanted to go a little different direction, and I am obsessed with special effects and monster making and all of that stuff. Like, anytime when I was a kid there was a special effects like documentary about a horror movie, like just up against the screen watching all of it, and I always wanted to write about a monster maker, but that didn't really fit with Quinn and her MO of her, just gonna run a lot. She's not artsy. And so I created Marion, and Marion is a monster maker. So we're now through her point of view, and she does eventually meet up with Quinn and Mike. So they are there and they end up joining up together. But I thought it was fun to expand the Fright Watch universe, and I was like, I don't know if my editor's going to be into this, but she was excited. So yeah, so I am interested to see. There weren't arcs of this book because they're like, oh, so they're in the series, we don't need arcs. So I'm very interested to see how people who liked the first 2 books respond to a different main character.
Right. I'm really looking forward to that. And I actually, I've been finding recently in the books that I've read where authors sort of do that and they take main characters and then make them more peripheral. It really is an interesting way to keep things fresh, especially if it's going to be an extended series. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you did with that. But I wanted to ask you a bit about Marion. You mentioned, she is the new sort of central focus of this book. And I find that in your books, you always have kids who are dealing with real problems, real issues that a lot of times I think that we gloss over, and they're really things the earlier they're addressed, the better. So, Quinn was dealing with grief over her father's death, and Marion has an anxiety disorder. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that and, how you want to represent that in a way that is both realistic, but also sensitive to people who are going to relate to that disorder.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, I try to be really conscious of adding those really internal conflicts in my little horror stories. So you have, the big monster, and then that kind of, more metaphorical one inside. And Quinn is definitely grief. And I wrote that based on my experiences. And Marion is also a little bit of Lorien, because I grew up with an anxiety disorder. And I always use writing and my creativity to kind of help me feel grounded and centered and balanced and all of those things. And that's where, when she's in her little workshop, which is her bedroom, when she's in there and she's creating her monsters and her makeups and her special effects and all those things, that's where she feels like her true self and where she feels confident. And every other aspect of her life, she feels kind of less than. So I really kind of wanted to capture that. And I wanted to also give a name to it, because I feel like I'm also a teacher, and I see students all the time showing all these symptoms of anxiety but not putting a name to it. And when I was a kid, nobody around me put a name to it until I was an adult. And Marion knows what's going on, she just doesn't really know how to calm herself down, and how to, she doesn't really have that toolbox yet. And so monster making is the thing that really helps her. So I hope it feels authentic. It felt authentic to me writing it, but yeah, I'm just one person, so hopefully it will feel like it is a real experience to kids reading it.
Right. I think that's so important because, like you said, when I was growing up and going through school, same thing. I was a very anxious child, particularly at school and with social interaction and all that stuff. And nobody knew what to call it. And I always read a lot, and that was my escape, but you never found characters who had a similar affliction, and you didn't have that relatability. So what I love about your characters is the depth there, because people think that, I think sometimes writing for kids is simple, and it's very much not. So we're going to come back to that in a little bit, but I really appreciate what you do, because I think there really is at least some level of empowerment in knowing what you actually are going through, and that other people are going through that too, and that you can actually deal with it in productive ways. And I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit more about scary things and fears and how they can kind of, work for us actually in a controlled way, because, Marion works with masks, which can be scary things. And I know that we both have an appreciation for Wes Craven and his Scream movies.
I almost wore my Scream shirt today.
I know I should have. I can't even tell. I have little skulls on
next
my
time.
That's appropriate. But and I think he said something, and I'm paraphrasing because I always butcher people's quotes. But scary movies don't create fear; they release fear, or something like that. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on that, because you can even see it with Marion in endeavoring to make these scary masks, that she's sort of embracing those things in a controlled way. And I'm assuming that probably gives her some level of comfort and freedom.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's how I am, because I'm afraid. I'm a ghost again. Sorry, my lighting. I'm afraid of everything in my real life. I'm afraid of everything on the news. I can't watch it or read it after a certain time. I don't know how to fix my lighting. Maybe if I turn this way, is that better? Okay. And I'm afraid of everything, but I'm not afraid of monsters. I'm not afraid of the supernatural, because I honestly don't believe in it, as sad as that sounds and unmagical as that sounds. I don't really believe in ghosts. Although if you put me in a house and told me it was haunted, I'd be scared. But in my day to day, I don't really believe in any of that. So it feels like a safe, like you said with Marion, it feels like a safe way to kind of test my boundaries and my fears. And I have always been drawn to that. I think Scream was really, I mean, going back to that, that was my kind of gateway into the horror world at a larger scale. I always liked reading creepy stories and R.L. Stein and scary stories to tell in the dark and all of that. But I distinctly, I write about middle school kids. And as a middle school kid is when I first saw the original Scream in the theater with my best friend. And we had to sneak in and we were in the front row and our necks were like this. And it was so electric. It was a packed theater and everybody was having that same experience. And I feel like horror and scary things and monster stories, like that is the genre, whether it's film, TV, or books, like that's the genre that like really, really resonates with me. And not all of it. Like I'm not a Saw fan or that kind of horror, but I do like a bit of heart with it, when you care about the characters and they're not just there for the body count. But I do really, really, yeah, all that stuff kind of resonates with me. And I think horror really does help us confront our own fears, like you said, in a safe space. But it also is, I don't know, cathartic, maybe?
Right.
That sounds kind of cheesy, but I find it cathartic to write it. And granted, I write for kids, but I also, as a teacher, know that like horror books are the books that I can give to reluctant readers or kids who are dealing with maybe something kind of unsettling or uncomfortable in their own lives, and they probably will be like, I don't know if I want to read that book, because that sounds too close to home. But I'm like, oh, but here's a book that has a horror spin on it, and they'll be like, oh yeah, let me read about the ghosts. So I feel like it is like a really, people misjudge it as a genre, which I'm not sure if that was your question, but I'm going down that tangent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like people really misjudge, one, like how hard it is to write horror, and two, how meaningful it can be. I did like an author event in person with I'm usually just with my spooky friends, but this was with a very lovely non horror author. And she kind of looked at me at one point and was like, oh, well, it's really important for, my books to deal with really important life lessons and issues. And she kind of looked at me. She's like, yeah, your books don't do that, right? Because it's horror. And I was like, I try. So I do think there's this real strong misjudgment of what horror can do and how it can actually show these real life things as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, Scream was a transformative experience for me too. It was funny because I was afraid of everything as a kid, like absolutely terrified. And now people like they're disbelieving that I love like all scary things, doesn't matter, books, movies, whatever. But I felt like it really was empowering and the fear was kind of controlled. And like you said, relatable characters like Sidney Prescott, who really have a lot of heart, and they overcome things, and you realize, well, if she can escape these loony nuts, like I can probably survive middle school or high school or whatever the deal is. So going off on tangents, let me just ask you this quick. Since we're both Scream fans, we can take a little wager, a little bet. What are your thoughts on whether or not Neve Campbell might secretly pop up in Scream 6?
I think she's going to, because what is Scream without her, unless they were cutting out Gail and everyone. I saw they're bringing Kirby back, which I'm excited about, but like I don't know how you can bring back like other legacy characters and not have a little Sydney cameo. I hope that was untrue and like a little publicity stunt, because that would be horrible if they really weren't paying her what she's worth. But yeah, I'm interested for sure. And I wonder like which kids from, I'm going to call it Scream 5, which kids from Scream 5 are going to be kind of leading that one.
Right.
So what's your wager? Do you think Sid is in it?
So hopeful and optimistic, even though the more I hear, like the more she's denying it. But if she signed a non-disclosure act, she can't really say anything. I really, really hope that she's going to be like the closer, and it's going to bridge 6 and 7, and then she'll be like the focal point of Scream 7. And what I think would be a really cool thing is if like they evened out this whole new 5, 6, 7 trilogy, and in 7, the new characters from 5 who survive, if they come and help her like she did in or in
Oh,
seven,
that would be really cool. John, write it because I
right?
want
That
that
would be
version.
like an arc.
Did they say there's going to be like three in the new reboot? Or are you
It's I
guessing?
don't I'm sort of guessing. I think that that's sort of been the plan, and it's gonna
Yeah.
depend on how this one does. But I also think that this movie is supposed to have like a more open-ended ending than some of them.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that you're probably supposed to be left with the idea that there's more to the story, and I just really hope that Nev Campbell is in it because if she's gonna come back for seven, you don't want six to just live in time as the movie without Nev Campbell because they wouldn't pay her what she's worth. Like even if she comes
Yeah.
back, that will always stand out as the movie without Sidney Prescott.
That is literally just what it would be called.
Yes,
Yeah.
the
I
Scream without Sidney, and that's
like
not a good
three is the
prospect.
Scream without any logic, and six would be the Scream without Sydney, which it's she, yeah. And I feel like, I mean, never met Wes Craven, but I feel like he would, I don't think he'd be down with that. I feel like Sydney was his final girl and she needs to still be there.
All right, I
So
totally agree, and I should apologize. That was a complete digression, but I figured when I'm a Scream fan, I just have to,
I am
ask
always
about it.
happy to talk about Scream and Ghostface and Sidney Prescott and all of them. I just listened to a podcast called there's this really funny podcast called Ruined that my friend got me into. It's like one of the hosts, I can't remember their names, is really into horror movies, and the other one is a chicken. And but she wants to know like what happens in all these famous horror movies so that she understands like the zeitgeist and pop culture and all the references. So the premise is her friend ruins all of the movies for her. So she'll like, so I just listened to the Scream 5 one and I was like, Gail, yeah, I'm loving Gail more as the series
Yeah.
goes on. Hated her in the beginning, but now I'm interested to see what they do with her in this one. Now that, yeah. All right, we can leave school. I feel like John and I could just sit here and
Yeah.
talk about Scream for the whole
Oh,
time.
this is all right. We need to like regroup when the one comes out. We can do a whole Scream episode that will have nothing to do with books, but we'll have fun. Can
Just
we
do
do that?
Scream.
We can
Yeah.
have like happy hour.
When Scream 6 comes out, we should do this again and just talk about Scream.
Totally. All right. I'm so down for that. Okay. So back to your books because you are Lorien Lawrence and you write books that are not Scream. So let me ask you about Quinn and Mike. So Quinn and Mike have a lot of hardcore fans now because they really headlined the first two books and they are still in Unmasked. It's just a bit more peripherally. But can you tell us, a bit about what their role is and what their relationship is now for people who are returning specifically for those characters?
They are at the Halloween dance together. So there's a hint. They are the Stitcher's Mike is very much like, this is science. We can explain this. There is an explanation for everything. Like very Scully, X-Files-y, and in the collectors, he's kind of doing it again in the beginning because by that point, the poor kid has PTSD and he's like having nightmares and I can't handle the fact that that really happened with the oldies. So you telling me it's happening again, like I can't go there. And so it's more of whereas in the first book, it's more of like a gut reaction. Like I believe in science and this can't be real because monsters aren't real. And in the second one, it's more emotional. Like I hear you, but I cannot agree to like investigate right away because I can't do this again. By the third one, he's like, yeah, fine. Okay. All right. We're back again. And he's pretty, I mean, like I said, I teach seventh grade and that's the age the characters start in the Stitchers. And the misplaced confidence that these young gentlemen have in seventh grade in real life, I kind of wanted to give to Mike. So he's a bit arrogant, he's a little cocky, but in like I hope an endearing way. And he so now he's gone from not believing to not wanting to believe to like, yeah, let's just do this because we are not only are we going to do this, but like Quinn and I, like we are the best monster hunters ever. Like, so he's kind of gone to the other extreme. And Quinn is just business as usual kind of to her, which really is stark contrast to our girl Marion, because she's like, one, doesn't know, like monsters are safe to her because she didn't think they were real. So now that not only are monsters real and she's being faced with one, she created it. So there's this like guilt associated with it. And like this one thing I was good at that made me feel good about myself, I was now like gonna kill people. Like there's a whole lot going on with her emotional state that Quinn and Mike kind of use their expertise and their confidence to kind of help her become more confident and brave.
Sure. I love
So
that.
they're back. They're still their sassy little selves. Marion is not sassy and she's not confident. So it was definitely a different writing experience to write from her point of view than Quinn's.
Sure. And I guess the good news for Quinn is she can probably outrun all of them if she needs to.
Yep.
Running into book 4. But let me ask you about that too, because I listened to an interview with you recently and you mentioned that, you have sort of an idea of where this series is going to go if you continue publishing books in this series. And I think that you said that you had a plan for something like 6 or 7 books. So I'm wondering, how important is it for you to know from book to book where you're actually headed, 2 or 3 books from now? And then as you're writing them, how much latitude do you allow yourself to sort of stray from that initial vision as you're actually immersed in writing the stories?
I'm like this weird combo. Writers always love to talk about, are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? Like, do you plan everything? I say it all the time. I plot everything. I need my outlines. And I can stray from them. Like if I plan like chapter 10, this is gonna, like, they never go exactly as planned, but I have to know how things end. And that's just for me. And I think it helps me stay organized and it helps me write faster. Not that writing fast is a goal, but like I do have a full-time job. I do have kids. Like I have a limited time a day that I can write. It's never what I would love where I can just sit quietly in my office for, a couple hours and no one's that doesn't happen. So I need to be able to kind of like fill in those blanks as I go. So if I have the roadmap, I find it's easier for me to just dive in and dive out. So I do have for Fright Watch, I do have this series planned to 6. I don't know if it will go past the trilogy, but for me, it helps me know where it helped me develop the magic system and like what is up with South Haven. I had to know how you could defeat all of these supernatural entities. And if I didn't know that, I feel like I couldn't write the first 3. So I do have an explanation of why all this stuff is happening. And I do have an ending in mind. And it is a way to bring all of the characters together. So it starts out, just Quinn and Mike, this little duo, and then it turns into a whole like monster squad essentially. And I need that for me. So in the Stitchers, when Quinn and Mike, and I knew it from early on, because when Quinn and Mike were going back and forth with their theories, oh, it's day vampires, oh, it's aliens, those are all the sequels. So book 4 would be aliens, book 5 would be day vampires, and then book 6 brings everybody back. And yeah, so I knew from very early, and I thought it would be fun to kind of put in little Easter eggs of what was going to come next, just for me, because I'm a nerd, not because anybody's going to read the Stitchers that closely and look for these clues, but I just thought it was fun to kind of know where I'm going. And it does help me to have an end in sight. So even again, if they never get published, I still feel like having those outlines just there, it's helped me understand this universe.
Oh, that's awesome. But now that I've heard that, I feel like I need to read those. So everybody who's watching needs to go out and buy like 10 copies each of all your books. Guarantee that we get 4, 5, and 6, because that just sounds too good not to. So let me ask you too, to expand on something that you just mentioned. You have a very demanding career, you have a family life, and you write novels. That is a lot, because that's sort of like 3 full-time jobs all rolled into one. So can you talk a bit about, I'm not going to say how do you find time to write, because I don't think that's the appropriate question for someone like you. It's really, how do you make time to write and then sort of try to live life in some kind of balance? How do you endeavor to do that? Because I can't wrap my mind around even attempting to. Like, I will find every excuse in the world not to write. And for someone like you can't do that at all, ever.
Yeah, I appreciate your wording of that question, John, because it is, it is hard to find time, but I like the way you worded it. I have to make time. this is just something I kind of taught myself to prioritize because again, like going back to our earlier conversation, it helps me with my own like mental health. Like this is that thing, this and exercise, but if it's between two and I'm real tired, it's like, yeah, no, I'm gonna like scribble some nonsense in my notebook for 30 minutes instead of, going on the treadmill or something. So I should do both. But it is that thing that I prioritize. But I feel like when I was younger, and I didn't have kids and my jobs were, I don't want to say less demanding, but teaching's just a different kind of beast. It's the kind of thing that it it doesn't just stay at work, like there's
Right.
an emotionality to it as well. Like you're in it, you're invested. So I am lucky to have a half an hour commute to 45 minutes, which some people are like, ooh, what? But mine is very pretty. Like I know you live in Connecticut too. So I like
Mhm.
go the back way through the
Yeah.
woods, over like a little river. Like it's adorable. And I can just put on the little playlist that I make for myself and I can kind of choreograph scenes in my head as I'm driving. And that really helps me because then I feel like I'm doing some work without actually writing anything. And I'll do that the way to work. And that kind of helps me wake up and whatever. And then on my way home, it helps me transition from teacher to writer. And I can kind of start to let go the school day, think about the project I want to write. And then I get home and it's chaos with my children. But then when I find a little quiet nook of time, even if it's sitting on the couch with a paper notebook or my laptop balanced on a pillow while they like sit on top of me, I can think about what I visualized earlier in the car and I can write it. And that is usually how I write my books is with a child on top of me or a dog on top of me or something. And yeah, I just kind of I try to use the time where I'm not physically writing to do that mental work, if that makes any sense at all. And then I kind of count everything as writing. So I count that moment in the car and I count like I have notebooks everywhere all over my house. And I count those little scribbles. If I'm on lunch at work and I don't have to grade something, then I might, scribble something on a notepad. And then by the weekend, I take all those scribbles and I type them up and it's like something might not be something good, but it's something and it keeps me in the habit. And I think that's what people say about exercise, right? Like you do it every day and it becomes a habit. I feel like I could get better at that, but I've gotten pretty good at making writing just a non negotiable thing that I do. And I'm okay if it's bad. I think that took me because I can be quite a perfectionist. I think that took me a lot of time. Like, oh, I wrote this thing, but it's horrible and I'm never going to do it. And you go down this really negative spiral.
Right.
Um, and I would do that for a long time. And then I was like, I don't have time. I don't have time for that negative spiral. Like these are words. Words are good. It's a start. Let's put it down and move on. And I think that's kind of where I'm at.
I think that's a great perspective. I think you said it. You said, you have something, good or bad. Like you can fix something, you can't fix
Yeah.
nothing. So as long as
Yeah,
there's something there, that's
exactly.
awesome. And I love too what you said about making a long commute kind of work for you because I had the same experience when I actually had a commute. It was like 30 minutes this way, 30 minutes that. And so the morning was like mental prep for the day. And
Yep.
then the afternoon was like, all right, now I'm gonna, get myself sane again and decompress before I get home so I can be another person. So that's
Yep.
really great advice for making things work for you and finding those pockets of time. So it can be done. You might have kids on you, dogs on you, but you can still have books. Um, so let me ask you too. We know that you love all things scary, and your books have been compared to, Goosebumps, Stranger Things, all kinds of things in that vein. And I'm wondering, what are your influences, and how do you try to keep things, a little bit, familiar, so people like me read them and we feel nostalgia for the books we read before, but also give them your own fresh Lorien twist? How do you balance the two?
I have no idea. That's a
That
great
is a good
question.
answer.
I just, I, I was writing non-scary things. I grew up loving scary books, like eating up R.L. Stein, reading Stephen King when I was way too young to read Stephen King and Anne Rice. But there was a lot less, I feel like at the time, books for my age, like that Fear Street type of book. Like there was all that lovely point horror, pulpy fiction. But then when I started taking like creative writing classes in high school and then college and whatever, my master's, there was like this push for like important books. And I know I've said this before in other interviews and things, but I will stress like all books are important books. And I wish I knew that earlier, because I had a lot less fun and a lot more anxiety and a lot more of those negative spirals when I was reading things that weren't fun and when I was writing things that I felt like that's what other people wanted from me. And the Stitchers, I just wrote for me because my dad had just passed away, had just moved back to the town I grew up in, which was Stratford. And I was back in this really nostalgic place, like having all of these emotions. And the combination of those two things, I was like, screw all this like literary stuff that I'm just not even like really having fun with. I want to write the kind of book that would have been fun when I was a kid. And so that kind of like kids on bikes, things that I did when I was a kid, I was like, I just want to go there and I want to channel that energy. And that's kind of, I think it's quite fitting that the first book I got published was the book I had fun writing. And that was the only book I had fun writing since I was a kid. And I was writing about monsters and vampires and all of those things. And I think sometimes going back to the start is really important in figuring out, why do you want to write? Because my husband, like at the time, was like, do you enjoy this? Like, because none of this looks fun to me. And he'd watch me write things and get a gajillion rejections and then cry and then write more things and get another gajillion. And he's just like, none of this sounds like it's fun or that it's like a good thing for you to be doing. And I was like, you know what, you're right. Let's just not do that. And let's just have a little bit of fun. So like my influences are, like 80s and 90s movies. I think that's why those pulpy books, those pulpy horror books that I still reread for like a little bit of comfort. Even now, I read a ton when the pandemic first started. Like I was just eating them up. And I noticed on like Instagram, a bunch of bookstagrammers or whatever, like were reading through a lot of those kinds of R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, Diane Hope, like those kinds of books, because they are quite comforting in a weird way. And so I guess, yeah, that pulpy stuff in those movies, like, Goonies, kids on bikes, being brave, having adventures, that's kind of the vibe I want.
Sure, and I think you totally achieve that. And one of the things I really enjoy about your books, because I do read them, yes, they are middle grade. No, I do not have children, but I love middle grade books. I love YA books. I think that there's an immediacy to them. There's an honesty to them. And if they're done well, they really take you back to the things that you were reading when you were growing up. And so I did have that experience, like, reading R.L. Stine or Christopher Pike. And it sort of evokes nostalgia in a very powerful way, which I think is maybe one of the reasons I gravitate towards these things, or to, movies or shows that I've seen a million times before. And I knew that I enjoyed them, so I might enjoy them again versus, maybe not. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but something that you said did lead me to another question. I did want to ask you, about sort of getting the right book in the right hands of a reader at the right time, because children can be very reluctant readers, and yet literacy is so important to development. And you spoke to this briefly when you were talking about, being a teacher and maybe finding a horror book that's going to speak to somebody who's living through a situation that's not ideal. But is there any other, words of guidance or advice that you would give to parents or caretakers or other teachers who are looking, to sort of figure out how to reach people with books that they might particularly enjoy, especially if they are those reluctant readers?
Don't be afraid. My advice is like, reading is reading. Reading is reading. If your kid is like, I've had parents email me like, oh, all my kid wants to read are graphic novels and I want them to read a real book, or all my kid wants to read are X, Y, and Z. And like, my response is always, reading is reading. Like, when they're doing independent reading, I'm not judging what they're reading. I'm not taking it out of their hand and saying that's not important enough, or that's not high level enough, or read something. Like, you're reading for enjoyment. And so a kid reading and finding a book that they love or a genre that they love is more important to me as a teacher than teaching them literary devices or, how to analyze a poem or, how to write a 5-paragraph essay. Like those are skills that we do teach, but like if they become a reader, all those other skills fall in place much quicker and easier than anything I could ever teach them. And so reading is reading, and there's so much judgment put on books. And I do think there's a lot of parents who are afraid of horror and scary books. I don't really talk about my books in my classroom because that's weird. I don't want to be that person. But I did have this really sweet student this year who went to the bookstore and asked her mom if she could buy the Stitchers, and she had 2 books in her hand, and one, I can't remember what it was, but it was a YA horror book that had like a pretty cover, so you wouldn't necessarily know it was horror. And then she had my middle grade in her hand, and she wanted to buy both books, and her mom's like, that one looks too scary, you can't get the Stitchers. And I was like,
you have no idea
the logic of that, first of all, and I get it's like, oh, that cover looks creepier, but it's like, okay, but just, I don't know, it's, people are afraid of horror, they're afraid of it's not the 80s, we don't have the satanic panic going on, thank goodness, but there is a lot of censorship happening. And I do think that people who are parents now of middle school kids grew up in the 80s and saw all of that. And everyone likes to think like they are very open-minded, but I think horror still has a stigma for people who are outside of the community. And I have had parents say that's too scary, or I don't want my kid to have nightmares. And I get all that, but you also, I had nightmares all the time when I read those books, but I still read, because then I was like, I have to read to the end because I have to know that they get out okay. And I have to, and so I can have the most reluctant readers. And if I read a short story, there's a great anthology called, I think it's either called Don't Turn Out the Lights or Don't Turn Off the Lights. And it is like an homage to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It even has the drippy illustrations. And I like to choose a couple of stories throughout the year to read and use for my lessons. And all the kids who are like, I hate reading, or this is going to be boring or whatever, I'll stop halfway through and be like, okay, so I should stop now, right? You're cool, you've had enough. No, you have to read to them. Oh, I thought you said that reading was boring and that you don't like it. I'm like, no, please read to the end. And this is the genre I get that with. I'm not saying other genres aren't important. I just think other genres get a lot of love from English teachers and librarians in particular. And I think sometimes horror gets kind of shoved to the Halloween shelf, pulled out during that time of year, and then gets put back. And reading is reading. And I just think that is the most important function of my job as an English teacher, is getting kids to like a book. And I feel like that needs to be every English teacher's goal, rather than, standards and all of that stuff that we have to deal with.
That's perfect. I love what you said, and you just knocked off a couple questions from my list. Great, because you have life to get back to. But I love that you're able to tell us, how you make storytelling work for you in the classroom, because it is, a great instructional tool, and people should probably use it more. But also, as you said, if somebody's reading a book, whether or not you approve of it, it will probably lead to more books, which is all for the better. And I found in my life that being exposed, to horrors on the page or in movies has made it far easier to be exposed to the horrors of the real world, because I've already sort of seen it and realized that, well, look for the silver linings or the happy endings, because they still can be there, even though things, that are bad are going to happen. So a few more questions for you, if you don't mind, and then I swear.
Of course.
But I did say that I was going to ask you, about specifically writing for children, for middle grade, for young adult, because people do, I think, take for granted and think that that's simple, and it's quite the opposite, because children are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt that a lot of adult readers might. So can you just briefly talk about what the challenges are for writing for your specific age group?
Oh my gosh, you just hit one of them. For sure. And I see that as a teacher and a parent and an author. They're not as an adult, I can pick up a book and I cannot really love it. I just read a book a week or two ago. That's by an author I like, but not, was it not a good book. And then I started, have you ever seen Dairy Girls from
Oh,
Netflix?
yes.
Like I stopped and I was like, this is so ridiculous. I need some ridiculous over the top characters to visualize with. So I like pictured the Dairy Girls as all of the characters, like that whole cast as, and it was so enjoyable. But that was like a lot of work that I had to do as the reader, but it
Right.
let me finish the book. Like a kid's not going to do that. I mean, first of all, it's ridiculous. But second of all, like they're not going to push through. If they don't like the first couple of pages, you pretty much get five. Like that's what I've seen as a teacher. You get 5 pages for them to be like, nope, I'm out. And they will not pick up that book again. And so that's hugely challenging. Again, like as a teacher and as an author, to keep in mind, like you have to hook them from the very beginning. Um, they don't love a lot of description, I found, like things that adult readers would find beautiful. They're like, skip to the end, get to the good part. Like they're super plot driven. And so that's important. I think middle grade in particular, I've dabbled in young adult writing, but I haven't published anything in that category. But like YA can be a little more bleak and hopeless. You know, by the end, important people can die and horrible things can happen, as you know. Um, Middle grade, you need that hope. And you do want to give them like a bit of a happy ending so that they don't get through the whole thing and feel like, well, what's the point? That kid was brave and they fought against this thing and they still didn't win. And so, since it's such an impressionable age and they're just like literally crawling out of their skin with emotions and hormones and all of those things that we all hate, they really need that hope and they need to see someone like them be successful. And that's like, doesn't matter what genre within the middle grade space, that's like hugely important. So, yeah, hooking them in the first 5 pages, really that's all you get. If a teacher or a parent is standing over them and saying, no, keep reading, read the first couple chapters, they might, but like they really need to be hooked fast, and they will not, like I said, I can be like, oh, but I'm gonna give it a chance because it sounds really good and so many of my friends love this book, like I'm just gonna power through. They're not gonna power through. And if they do power through and they get to an ending that they feel like was like, well, what was the point in that, then I hate books again becomes their mantra. So it's a very tricky age. They also are not buying their own books, which is a weird thing from like a marketing standpoint, is a weird thing because, like if you're a YA author or an adult author, you can like basically target the people who are actually reading your books. Like I can't target kids directly. So I'm trying to target, and my publisher's trying to target librarians and teachers and parents. So it's a very, I think you said, I don't think I misinterpreted. I think you said like people think it's kind of like an easier or fluffier category. And I do see a lot of people like, oh, I'm going to write middle grade because I've heard more books sell. It's like you get paid less, middle grade books cost less than YA and adult. And it's really tricky to keep all those things balanced. So yeah, I do love it though. It's my favorite category to write for.
Yeah, well, they're fun to read too, and I love the distinction that you made between middle grade and YA because I think that so many people, don't realize where that distinction is, and middle grade tends to be a little more hopeful, and YA can be bleak and hopeless because you're teenagers and you're in high school and you realize that that's bleak and hopeless is a real thing, and if you're lucky, you come out a better
Yeah.
person on the other side. So you just nailed that one. Final two questions. So I asked this one of everybody, but I don't remember whether or not I asked you when you were on the show last time because it was 3 of you. So I have to ask for aspiring writers out there. What is the best advice that you were ever given in terms of a creative or writing life? And then the best advice that you were never given and you actually had to learn yourself throughout the process of doing the work.
Best advice that I was given was to read a lot, which I'm sure probably every writer on your show says, because it is really good advice. And
Great
I feel like
advice.
you can't write well in your genre if you're not reading it. I also think you can't be a good English teacher or a good school librarian if you're not constantly reading the new things. I can't tell you how many teachers only talk about the book Wonder, because they just aren't. How many years ago did that come out? Like, it's still on the New York Times bestseller list because people who, again, are buying the books, not the kids, they're just buying that book over and over again. And we get into these cycles, which is boring for a kid. They want to come into a library or a classroom and see new things. And so you kind of have to keep your finger on the pulse a little bit and actually read, get on NetGalley, read some arcs, make some friends in the writing community, and actually read their books. With that, though, I don't usually read spooky middle grade when I'm writing something. Like, I'm finishing up a project right now, so I've moved to adult. I'm reading adult stuff just because I don't want to accidentally like blur those lines. But when I'm not working on something middle grade, I'm always reading middle grade for my two jobs. And then advice that no one gave me. I think it's just that stuff can be horrible and it's okay. Like, you can throw out, I've gotten to the point where it's taken me a really long time. I'm almost 40 and I've been writing since I was 6, but I started actively like querying when I was in my early 20s. So it's been like almost 2 decades of me experimenting with different things. And I'm way less precious with my work now. And that might seem weird to say as a good thing, but I think sometimes you have to just be able to let it go if you're writing something and it's not working, or you think this is the most wonderful thing I've ever written, and then you reread it in a couple of days or in a month or in a year and you're like, oh, okay. Like, you have to be willing to throw that out, and not think that, like, I don't know. I think I do know a lot of writers, and especially when I was in writing programs, who were like, well, I can't get rid of that. That was like, it's like, but the rest of your book's not working if you don't change that thing. And I think being less precious with my time, just writing whenever I can and being okay if what I'm writing is not going to end up in the final draft, like, that's all okay. And I think that took me a little too long to learn, if I'm honest.
I think a lot of people would agree with that, because so many of us tend to be perfectionists, and if it's not perfect, why write it? And then you have nothing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bummer. And I'm just going to tack on a piece of advice that I learned today from your very perceptive husband, who said, if it's not fun, why are you doing it? So you should probably
I should make a t-shirt.
Yes. He could have a whole little side business. I think
it's with writing and it's with reading. Like, if you're not having fun reading that book, then I think it's okay to drop that book. Like, I mean, I tried the Dairy Girls thing, which I highly recommend, because if they can't fix a book, then who can? Like, it's just not for you. But yeah, kids won't do that. But I do like that quote. I should tell my husband you said that.
Yeah, there you go. But it's interesting too, now that you say that, I think, when we're kids and we're not having fun with something, we just stop doing it, and then we forget about that as adults until somebody reminds us.
That's so true.
Like, oh my gosh, like, we're just reverting to childhood, but in good ways. All right, final question. So I have to congratulate you. You just announced, that you signed a new book deal, which is really, really exciting. So you have another novel. It's The Many Hauntings of the Manning Family, coming out. I think it's the fall of 2024?
Yeah.
So can you give us a little teaser of what that might be?
So it was pitched as like The Conjuring for kids. So Connecticut, like the Warrens and that whole like mythology behind that, a ghost hunting family is kind of just like ingrained in us. And I wanted to tell that kind of story. So this is the first time I'm writing something that's dual point of view. So it's 2 twins who are mediums. They come from this legacy of really famous like demonologists, ghost investigators, except it skipped their mom's generation. So the mom is like peak stage mom, and it's just like, we are filming all of these videos, and like, because their grandparents came into fame before YouTube, where anybody can film a ghost hunting video on their phone and get like 1 million views. And so the mom is having all this anxiety, like, we're not getting as many views, we're losing our legacy, we need to go bigger. And so the twins don't really have kind of a life of their own. And so one of the twins wants out, and she doesn't know how to tell the family. She's worried about her brother and leaving him, but she wants to leave this like family business and just be a normal teenager. And so she's planning that this is going to be the last haunt, except the last haunt goes terribly wrong. And so that's where a chunk of the story takes place. It takes them to this like super haunted, abandoned theater. So I am nearing the end of the draft, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. I was nervous about doing the 2 point of views, but I'm in it now, so I'm having fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds creeptastic. And in the meantime, people can go check out
Yes.
Watch Unmasked August 30th. Thank you so much, Lorien. I could keep you here all day, and I've already kept you here for a good part of the day, but really.
No, I had so much fun.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.